Welcome to Does It Matter by Brainy Ballers, where we dissect the game with cutting-edge analytics to give you the upper hand. We analyze everything from hand sizes to average depth of targets to uncover hidden trends that no one else sees. Say goodbye to guesswork and hello to data-driven domination. Because here at Brainy Ballers, we don't just watch the game, we understand it. So get ready, it's podcast time.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're tackling a question that, it comes up a lot if you follow the NFL and definitely if you're into fantasy football.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It's about rushing yards over expected, or RYOE. The big question is, does this metric, does it really tell us if a running back is going to be successful down the line?
Right. Can it actually predict future performance?
Exactly. We've dug into some source material that looks at this hard using data going back to 2008. It tries to see if a player's rookie RYOE score, forecasts their fantasy output later on.
Yep. And our job today really is to kind of boil all that down for you, give you the quick take on what this RYOE thing is all about and what the numbers actually say.
So how did they approach it? What was the method?
Well, the analysis, it zeroed in on the top 50 PPR fantasy finishers every season.
Okay.
Going back to 2008, which that's basically when RYOE data first became consistently available. They basically linked up each guy's rookie RYOE number with how many fantasy points they scored in the following years. The data itself came from MFB Analytics, pretty solid source.
Okay, so digging into that data, what did the first look suggest? Did RYOE seem promising initially?
Well, yeah, actually. The research pointed out what I call an optimal range for that rookie RYOE.
An optimal range.
Do you want to start dominating your drafts? At brainyballers.com, we've researched every metric under the sun for you to find which ones are best linked to fantasy points. You can access hundreds of metrics to sharpen your scouting ability so you know which metrics matter and which are just noise. Stop guessing on which thresholds to look for within each metric. Big numbers can be misleading or irrelevant. Our Ultimate Athlete Blueprints reveal essential scouting metrics, their importance and benchmarks within each metric that help predict a player's probability of being a success or bust. Elevate your scouting ability with Brainy Ballers' Ultimate Athlete Blueprints today. Click the link in the description. Now back to the show.
Somewhere between 0.2 and 1.3. If a player fell in there, it kind of means they're consistently getting a bit more yardage than you'd expect based on their blocking, making guys miss, finding creases.
Right, sort of creating their own yards.
Exactly. And here's where it looked, well, really interesting at first. Players in that zone, that 0.2 to 1.3 range, they show up in the top 10 fantasy finishers way more often, like 24.3% more often compared to the guys finishing near the bottom, like 41st to 50th.
Wow. Okay, that sounds pretty significant.
It does, right.
Yeah.
And get this, in 12 out of the 16 seasons they looked at, the top 10 guys generally had higher rookie RYOE scores.
So on the surface, that looks like a strong link, like maybe RYOE is the key.
That's what you'd think. It paints a really compelling picture, almost like, okay, we found it. But, that brings up the big question with any data.
What happens when you dig deeper?
Right. What happens when you run the actual stats, the rigorous tests? Well, despite those interesting patterns, the statistical test they used, the Pearson correlation test.
Okay, that measures how strongly two things are related.
Exactly. It measures how they move together. For RYOE versus future fantasy points, the value was just 0.086.
0.086. Is that good? It sounds low.
For elite athletes, you want to see at least 0.1 for a factor to be considered predictive on its own. So it just missed that mark.
So if RYOE on its own isn't predictive, how does it compare to something else scouts use, like draft capital?
Good question. So draft capital, where a running back gets picked in the NFL draft, that showed a correlation of negative 0.234.
Negative. Why negative?
Well, draft position is kind of backward, right? A lower number means a higher pick. So the negative correlation means the higher someone is drafted, lower number, the more likely they are to score more fantasy points. It makes sense.
Right. Okay. So draft capital is a much stronger signal than RYOE's 0.086.
Much stronger, yeah. Indicates draft position is, far more predictive on its own than RYOE is.
But was there anything else interesting about RYOE in the data? Any other trends?
Actually, yes. There was kind of an evolving picture. While RYOE isn't a standalone predictor, they did notice something interesting in the last decade of data. That optimal range we talked about, it showed up about 14.2% more often among the top 10 finishers compared to the bottom 10 finishers just in the most recent 10 years.
Hmm. So more top running backs lately seem to fall into that efficient RYOE range, even if the overall correlation isn't strong.
Sort of, yeah. It suggests that maybe efficient runners, guys who do exceed expectations yardage-wise, are becoming a bit more common among the elite backs recently. But again, correlation versus causation. Tricky stuff.
Right. So after all this number crunching, all the analysis, what's the final verdict for someone listening, trying to figure out how to scout players? What's the takeaway on RYOE?
The conclusion for the source material is pretty clear, really.
Don't rely on it.
Basically, yeah. Despite those interesting trends, especially the recent one, RYOE should not be used as a standalone metric when you're evaluating players.
It's just not that magic bullet for predicting fantasy points.
Nope. It's not the single key that unlocks everything, unfortunately. It might be a piece of the puzzle, but definitely not the whole picture.
Okay. So that leads to maybe a final thought then.
Go for it.
If RYOE, which seems kind of promising on the surface, turns out to be not very predictive on its own, it makes you wonder, right? What other stats or single data points are people maybe leaning on too heavily, viewing them in isolation?
That's a great point. It really raises that bigger question for anyone trying to evaluate talent or performance in, well, anything complex.
How do you weigh everything?
Exactly. It raises that bigger question. How do you effectively combine all these different pieces of information, stats, draft capital, film analysis, situation, you name it, to build a truly complete and hopefully more accurate picture when you're evaluating something as complex as an NFL player's potential?